Time has now run out for U.S. lawmakers to agree on federal funding, which means the government has now officially shut down. And the Democratic-led Senate rejected the temporary bills by House Republicans that would have delayed Obama's health care law as the price to continue funding. Obama warned the shutdown will have a very real economic impact on everyday people. But as RT's Liz Wild's been finding out, it won't exactly be a total disaster.
Some federal offices will shut down, federal employees furloughed. Federal air traffic controllers will remain working. So will the majority of the Department of Homeland Security. Everything from the U.S. Coast Guard to the Transportation Security Agency will keep operating. Federal prisons will stay open. The State Department will keep processing passports, but there may be delays. Social Security and Medicare payments would keep coming. Food stamp benefits will be available, but many other services under the SNAP program that help needy mothers and children would be suspended. The U.S. Postal Service would remain in business. Federal courts are exempt, so court will remain in session, at least until mid-October. But if the government stays shut down longer than 10 days, judiciary jobs would be at risk for furlough. Active duty military is considered essential, so men and women in uniform will stay at work. But it's likely paychecks will be delayed. That's because even though the military is considered critical, about half of the Department of Defense is not. On the chopping block, NASA. Most of its employees would be furloughed. A few workers would remain on the job to man mission control. The Food and Drug Administration would suspend most safety inspections. Perhaps taking the biggest hit, tourism. National parks across the country will close. So will museums here in Washington, D.C. That includes the Smithsonian Museums and the National Zoo. This 24-hour panda cam would go dark. Ultimately, it is up to the executive branch to decide who is essential and who is not. Right now, it looks like roughly 800,000 federal workers, many of them here in Washington, would temporarily be out of work, and the first government shutdown in nearly 2 decades. In Washington, Liz Wall, RT.
Now, last-minute decisions on the verge of a shutdown have recently become fairly common in Washington. Let's flash back to a couple of the closest calls in recent years for you here on RT. Let's go back to 2011. The closing of the government was averted just 1 hour before the deadline. After a painful legislative standoff, the budget deal was finally agreed upon. Now, the debt ceiling, another nerve-wracking issue, the summer of 2011. It was sending shockwaves across America and the wider world. Though the sky didn't fall, as it was agreed upon just 2 days before the time was up. And political commentator Brian Fox, he told my colleague Matt Trezor that Washington is, well, quite used to playing deadline games.
Old enough now that I can look back and see the same sort of political opportunism and grandstanding every time with different variations. And the main variation being who's in power, who's in the White House. Is it political puppet number 1 from the Republicans, or is it political puppet number 2 from the Democrats? And those are the variables other than who also controls Congress. So that's the stage that's set for this grand theater.
Why, though, this drama, this theater?
Political opportunism is the game of the town, Washington, D.C. They both have the same basic platform. They're all on board for endless war. They're all on board for endless spending, one for corporate welfare, one for social welfare. They're all on board for surveillance state. They're all on board for the police state. They're all on board for the big things. It's just all about a crisis, a deal in crisis, where a lot of deals are exchanged.
So the essential federal services will continue working despite the shutdown. Gerald Celente, we spoke to earlier, he's the publisher of the Trends Journal. He says, be careful of the hype. The warnings of a collapse have been strongly exaggerated.
It's more theatrics than anything else. They keep talking about how it's going to, a shutdown will bring down the economy by 1.4%, the GDP. How do they know? Every percentage they've ever come up with about anything has always been wrong. It's like this is more theatrics. And it's very important to look at this not only as the shutdown, but really it's symptomatic of all of Washington. Go back to 2011. For 2 years, all we kept hearing about was going over the fiscal cliff, going over the fiscal cliff. They talked about it so much that Standard & Poor's, they downgraded U.S. creditworthiness. And then we had sequestering. And next month we're going to have the debt ceiling. Again, this is more theatrics. It's the Washington drama queens doing what they always do, behave in a manner that is unbecoming of professionals and adults.